Hey guys, it's Mickey. I'm up here in Janesville, Wisconsin this weekend, and I am here with Dr. Emily Grezda. She's a reptile vet up in the Chicago area.
Yep.
And, I wanted to ask her some questions about, like, what's some of the more common mistakes that new keepers make with their reptiles.
So the biggest thing that I'll see is that people see an inexpensive animal and be like, oh, this is really easy and really inexpensive to set up. So like bearded dragons are great pets, but they are very expensive, even if you get a $20 one, to buy a big enough enclosure. They need a lot of space, all the heat lights, all the UV lights, things like that. So I see a lot of mistakes there, where then, they'll come in with stuck sheds or a respiratory infection, and they're like, I don't know what I did wrong. And lots of people go in with the best intentions, but not necessarily have all of the research before they're like, oh my gosh, I just want to buy this thing, type of deal.
So, like, as breeders, a lot of us are breeders. What kind of things can breeders do to help, a new keeper of a reptile, to be successful?
I'd say talking to each prospective buyer and being like, hey, like, what enclosure do you have for them? Or what enclosure are you going to buy today for them, type of deal. Because if they can buy something like a, gargoyle gecko, crested gecko, because all the things for them are in this room, but then, being like, hey, what are you actually going to get for them? Make sure that they know what they're getting into, type of deal, not just selling a bearded dragon and being like, oh yeah, like, great, thanks, bye. Like, if the little kid wants it or whatever, know, is the parent also involved with the animal, because if a parent buys it for a kid, they are still responsible for that animal, because kids, while they can be responsible, are not always responsible and on top of things. And when that kid grows up and goes to college, what's going to happen with that animal?
Yeah, they usually call somebody like me, hey, my kid just went to college. So like, the best thing that breeders can do that are selling animals to people to set them up for success is just basically give them the rundown of like, hey, this animal requires UVB, it requires a 120-degree basking spot. Right. You need vegetables, just go through the whole vitamin regimen and everything like that. And there's tons of online resources too.
Yes, and there's good information and bad information.
Yeah.
So there's lots out there. I really like there's lots of veterinary resources like ARAV, A-R-A-V is a really good website where you can find reptile vets in your area if you're not around here. And lots of good resources on. I really like Reptiles magazine has some good.
They've got some really
information.
Good care sheets,
They've got some really good care sheets for lots of like less common species as well.
Yeah.
They usually have pretty good advice. Another thing I would say with keepers, and including breeders, is not trying to do too much veterinary work of your own. Yeah. And not just like deworming everything that comes through. Lots of people like to have Panicure on hand, and I understand that sentiment, but giving a medication to an animal is not a benign thing. There are side effects. So actually, Panicure can cause bone marrow suppression. And so that can impact how an animal grows. So if you're just giving it without doing a fecal and knowing if they actually need it, that can be harmful. So it's stuff that people don't necessarily think about, even if they can keep Panicure at home,
Well, it also dehydrates them quite a bit too.
Yeah, there's lots of side effects to medication. So it's not just, oh, like I'll give my animal this because this is probably what the vet would do. Well, if you don't know if it needs it, you can actually be causing harm.
I think what could avoid a lot of that, though, is if people do research before they pick an animal up and set it up properly, because I feel like that's where a lot of newer keepers fail, is the initial setup.
Right, for sure. And then they come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, now I have to change all these things. Or maybe if they spent a bunch of money and had all the best intentions, but it wasn't the right stuff, they spent the money on the wrong stuff or whatever. Like I had someone come in, and they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize my Uromastyx needed water. I thought they just needed water if they were, breeding. That's literally something that came in. And I was like, nope, like this, your animal's severely dehydrated. That's what's happening here. So
that's why it's all wrinkly.
Like, just because it's a desert animal doesn't mean, that it needs no humidity. And same thing with bearded dragons. People are like, oh, they don't need any humidity. Well, bearded dragons actually have 30 to 40% humidity because they live in like little outcroppings when they're not basking and things like that.
Yeah, people's minds seem like they explode whenever you show like a bearded dragon's natural habitat in Australia.
Right.
Like, oh, there's grass there, and it's crazy.
Right. There's plants. It's not just like sand, bottom and dry and no water dish. Like, every animal should have a water dish that's big enough for them to soak in, even if you don't normally see them soak or whatever. that's a really good idea. Sometimes not all of my animals have that in terms of like my gargoyle geckos don't, but they're in bioactive enclosures that have automatic misting systems, so they get soaked once a day. So it kind of depends on the animal you have, but especially for the arid ones, that's what's going to help. A big water is just going to help with the humidity too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Emily.
For sure.